You either go on a course to have your thinking checked, or unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go. That's the influence that these ideologies have on the police. And I know this because I'm currently fighting on behalf of a number of police officers who are in precisely that position.
Today I sit down with Harry Miller, a retired police officer from Humberside. Harry was investigated by his own local force over posts he made on Twitter and ended up challenging the police in court. In a landmark ruling, the Court of Appeal said that Harry's rights to freedom of expression had been violated and his treatment could have a chilling effect on public debate. Harry is now the CEO of Fair Cop and the Bad Law Project. I'm Lee Hall and this is British Thought Leaders. Harry Miller, thanks for joining us on British Thought Leaders.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm hoping we can start with giving the viewers a bit of background. So back in 2018, 2019, you wrote some tweets, including some gender critical issues. Someone complained about the tweets and you got a visit from the police.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Around about 2018, I suddenly became aware that the trans thing was getting quite big. And then I heard this phrase, trans women are women, which made no sense to me on a philosophical level at all, because trans women are clearly not women. They present as women, they act as women, they perform as women, but they are men, because sex, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely immutable. And your sex is defined by your gametes and by the way your body is functioned toward one set of gametes or the other, male or female. A woman is an adult human female. Now, being a man, of course, I've been asked many times, why would I get involved in something that doesn't involve me? Well, of course, it does involve me because, I'm the father of daughters. I'm a husband to a wife. My mother was a woman. I've got lots of friends who are women. And what was interesting is that my wife, who is a very private person, said, until men start speaking up, people won't listen. So at that point, I thought, well, I'm going to start getting involved in this debate. After all, the government had invited us to debate. There was the government consultation around reform of the Gender Recognition Act. So we had a literal invitation to comment. So I began to comment, and I quickly realised that that you couldn't win an argument on Twitter or actually anywhere by using reason and logic, because facts were defined as hate, which struck me as incredibly odd. So then I started to use sarcasm. So one of the things that I was in trouble for was saying I was assigned mammal at birth, but I identify as a fish. Don't misspecies me. And somebody complained about this tweet along with a so-called limerick that I'd retweeted and one or two other bits and pieces. The police came to my place of work and informed me that even though I'd not committed a crime, on the basis that somebody had been offended, I'd committed stage 1 on a 5-step journey to genocide. That's what they said. They have this thing called the Allport scale, which is an escalator, which begins at what they call antilocution, which is speech, negative speech, hate speech or what have you. It then moves up into direct discrimination. It then moves up into name calling and violence. It then moves up into murder. Then it moves up into genocide. So the police argued that by me saying I was assigned mammal at birth, but I identify as a fish, don't misspecies me, this was stage 1 on a journey which, without police intervention, would lead to the conditions that led to the Holocaust. They literally argued this at the High Court in front of a High Court judge.
So they accused you of a non-crime crime? Or?
Yeah, well, what they accused me of is this thing that nobody had ever heard of before, that had been around since 2014. And it was called a non-crime hate incident. Now, the interesting thing about a non-crime hate incident, as the name would suggest, is it's not a crime. There was no suggestion, in my case, that I'd committed a crime. I'm an ex-police officer, so I understand that a crime has a legal definition. It is mens rea plus actus reus minus a defence. In other words, the guilty mind coupled with a guilty action minus a defence. That's what it is. So there was no question at all whether or not I'd committed a crime. But the argument of Humberside Police was that I was on my way to committing a crime. And that's when they famously said, we're here to check your thinking. They wanted to check my thought processes to see if I had a latent criminal mindset that they could correct before I went on to commit murder and genocide. That was their argument. So they record these things called non-crime hate incident. Now the interesting thing about a hate incident is that it does not require any element of hate. It said that in the guidance. You record a non-crime hate incident based on perception alone. So if somebody, either the victim, well there's a loaded word, but either the victim or any other person, including the police, perceive an action to be based in hostility toward one of the 5 monitored strands, gender identity being one of the 5 monitored strands, then it had to be recorded as a non-crime hate incident. Now what's interesting is the language they use. Regardless of evidence of hate, I was deemed to be the suspect. The person who complained was deemed to be the victim. I was recorded on a crime report for the crime, non-crime of trans hate. Now, that is as Orwellian as it gets. The idea that there can be a crime which is a non-crime or a non-crime which is a crime, that is Orwellian doublespeak. It's entirely wrong. We went through the court system. We went to the High Court, and then we went to the Court of Appeal, and we had initially the High Court declared that the actions of Humberside in relation to me were unlawful, so we won that. But the guidance itself that the police were following was deemed to be lawful. We then said that's illogical. How can you have lawful guidance, but following the guidance, how is that, but is unlawful? That makes no sense. So we went back to the Court of Appeal and we won at the Court of Appeal. Now what's interesting there is that the Court of Appeal said that the recording of non-crime hate incidents themselves is not illegal, but there has to be a degree of rationality attached to them. There has to be a filter. It can't simply be on perception alone. There has to be some element, and I suppose what they mean is objective element of hatred toward a particular community. There's got to be something more than perception. Unfortunately for us, in spite of this massive victory, the College of Policing, who are the authors of this guidance, and they push it out to all 43 police forces in England and Wales, all they've done is simply play with the terminology. So instead of having a non-crime hate incident, they've rebranded it as an offence incident non-crime, which is in effect, changing the name of jam to strawberry preserve and hoping that nobody notices. So now instead of having NCHIs, we have the beautifully named OINCs, offence incident non-crime. So the police can now give you an OINC, based on, not based on perception this time, but based on somebody feeling disturbed by something you say. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing with different dressing.
Right. Do you have any idea how common these non-crime hate incidents or OINCs are?
Yeah, round about 66 a day.
Really?
The police are issuing around about 66 a day, or they were. We've yet to see what the figures are going to be like this next year. Of course, when you encourage the police to see hate everywhere, guess what? They see hate everywhere. It's what their college, what the professional body has told them to do. And in fact, in the original guidance, 2014 guidance, it says this. It says seeing a decrease in hate crime is not an appropriate target because it may discourage and demotivate police officers. Imagine that. Imagine being the police, the hate squad, the squad whose job it is to go and get rid of hate and hate crime, and to put in the guidance, seeing a decrease in hate crime is not an appropriate target. Imagine that. Imagine if we applied that to the murder squad, for instance, and said a decrease in murder is not appropriate. Or the robbery squad, a decrease in robbery is not appropriate. Like what? What they're doing is conducting a sustainable business model. where they see hate everywhere in order to get more funding for hate, in order to see even more hate everywhere, to get even more funding for hate, so that they then embark on this highly sustainable business model. That's what this is all about. Hate is an industry. It's a Ponzi scheme, is what it is. They're like the religious fanatics who see Jesus in a slice of toast. They see hate everywhere because they're conditioned to.
You mentioned several times the College of Policing. Can you tell us what the College of Policing does and what it's supposed to do?
Well, okay, so it was set up in, I think, 2012, and its aim was to professionalise the police, to make the police accountable, to give guidance to the police, to be the professional overseer of the police forces in England and Wales. If you look, it's a private company, actually. You can download its accounts from Companies House, and I would absolutely encourage anybody to do so because the accounts tell a hell of a story. I think this last year they spent something like 71 million. I don't know what they do with that, but they have a staff of around about 650 odd people, and they've got a wage bill around about 40 million. Oh. Now, if you divide the wage bill simply by the number of people who are employed, it works out at a salary of around about 50-some thousand per person. Now, you can buy 2 new constables for £50,000, 2 new constables, and have a little bit spare change as well. So what they're supposed to do is not what they're doing. Now, one of the things that they claim is that they want to professionalise the police. Now, one of the things that a professional organisation does, it looks at a problem, thinks of a way of solving it, puts in measures to do that, and then down the line, they then test to see if their hypothesis has worked, don't they? That's what a professional body does. Okay, so back in 2014, this whole notion of the non-crime hate incident, it was a theory, it was a hypothesis. Maybe if we start recording non-crime, maybe if we can nip that in the bud, it won't escalate based on the Allport scale to actual crime. So nothing wrong with it in theory. As a working hypothesis, fill your boots, have a go at it. The trouble is, the police collected, since 2014 and 2019, 120,000 non-crime hate incidents, and that number has been escalating. They reissued their guidance in October 2020 following my High Court ruling, in which the High Court judge likened Humberside police to the Stasi, the Cheka and the Gestapo based on them following the hate crime guidance and non-crime hate incidents. The college reissued the guidance, and I asked them the question directly. I said, what research have you done to test the efficacy of recording non-crime hate incidents? The answer came back, we haven't done any. None at all. They hadn't done any empirical research, they hadn't done any academic research. We asked every chief constable in the country, how successful has this policy been? And the answer came back, we don't know, we don't test it. That is not the mark of a professional body. It's not. You have a hypothesis, you run it, you test it, and then you evaluate it at that point. The problem here is the police have found a whole new use for non-crime hate incidents which have nothing to do with preventing crime. Nothing. What they do, they serve as a chilling effect on free speech. And that is the end that the police love. That is what they found to be effective and useful. That with the threat of giving you a police record for hate, with the threat that record of hate can be disclosed on an enhanced DBS check, which will then limit your employment possibilities, that serves as a chilling effect across across the public. Okay. The consequence of that is people watch their speech. People don't say things that the police don't approve of politically. And that's what this is all about. We have a de facto political police force who do not want us to express contrary opinion. They do not want us to challenge, even when the government invites us to do so, they don't want us to challenge certain ideologies. So if you challenge the notion of gender identity, you're a hater. Black Lives Matter, you're a hater. I imagine that very soon it will be green stuff. You'll then become a hater of the earth or what have you. And of course, all of this stuff, once the police have adopted an ideology, there are no checks and balances, because you're not dragged in front of a custody sergeant where the arresting officer has got to give an account as to why there's been an arrest. You don't have to justify it to the CPS in order to go ahead and charge, and you certainly don't have to justify it in front of a magistrate, a judge and a jury. The police have found a way, an effective way, of operating outside of the normal checks and balances of the judicial system. It's ideological policing, and it's absolutely terrifying.
One question a lot of people watching this will have in their minds is, how do the police justify, because it's not like they've dealt with all the crimes and now they can deal with this. There's actually quite a lot of crimes happening out there. How do they justify spending so much time on non-crimes?
Well, but partly because non-crimes that are easy. If it's perception-based, if a crime is perception-based, then solving it is perception-based as well. So they can increase crime and increase their solving it all at the same time. So it makes them look good. And of course, if you go at, let's say, robbery, theft, burglary, these are proper crimes. These are crimes that have a real devastating effect on people's lives. But the way the police operate is they've effectively become non-crimed. They've effectively become, put a crime report in, we'll give you a number, let it become an insurance problem, not a police problem. And that's why we have less than 6%, I think it is, of robberies solved. We have less than I think it's about 3 or 4% of burglaries solved. They're not being solved because they're not being investigated. And they're not being investigated because they have not been prioritised. What's been prioritised is political policing and ideological policing.
A lot of the issues that come into the spotlight to do with the police are to do with gender and sexuality. We see the pride flag being hoisted outside the station, cars painted in rainbows. We even see the police taking part in the Pride Parade. Mm-hmm. Back when you were a policeman, did you get told not to take part in political events when you went to police them?
Yeah, this is how different it is. Back in the sort of 1990s and the early 2000s, take the Orange Parade, for instance. Okay, so the Orange Parade, particularly in Liverpool, I think it's the Orange Protestants. They're a minority. They're a minority group. They passionately believe in what they do, and they have their march. I think it's in June. And the police are told, you turn up and you march to make sure everything's okay. But don't even accidentally march in tune, in time with the drum. Don't even accidentally march in time with the drum, in case it gives the impression of bias, in case it gives the impression of favour. Now we're at the stage where the police literally supply the band to the likes of Pride. Literally. They're not there to police it. They're there to participate in it. That is wrong, entirely wrong. Now, I understand that times move on, and that the police are, the people of the police and the police of the public and all that sort of stuff. So I would rather not see the police at all at Pride, other than there to make sure that nothing kicks off. But as a compromise, what I've suggested is, okay, go, march. But don't put on any symbols. Don't wear rainbow epaulets. Don't wear rainbow helmets. Go down looking smart. Go down in your best uniform and march beneath the banner that says serving our communities without fear or favour. That way you're signalling to the Pride community that you're serving them, but you're also signalling to those who are not part of the Pride community that you're also serving them. People like me would be then, well, okay, I'm neutralised, because they're not actually saying we're policing for these people. We're just saying we're serving our community. The Pride community is part of the community. Of course we're policing for them and serving them, as we are all communities. But the second they put on a badge, the second they stitch colours into their epaulets, or paint a rainbow car, or raise a flag above the police headquarters, or, as they do in Leicestershire, paint their riot shields so that they say policing with pride and paint them in the trans flag colours, then you know you've got a political police force.
So what is it that caused the move from police being like that to police taking part in things like a parade?
Ideological capture is what's happened. I think from a position of guilt, because we had not very far from here actually, we had the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Then we had an inquiry into the murder of Stephen Lawrence by Macpherson, and one of the things Macpherson identified was that there was institutional systemic racism within the police. Okay, so there was a sense of guilt over that, I suppose, and a desire not to get it wrong with other communities. I think taking a generous view, I think that's probably what motivated it. Unfortunately, though, pressure groups who claim to be working on behalf of vulnerable minorities have infiltrated police forces through through these things called IAGs, so-called independent advisory groups. Now, Civitas have just done a fantastic report to show that documents how these so-called independent advisory groups are not at all independent. Not at all. You have the likes of Mermaids, you have the likes of Stonewall, you have the likes of Black Lives Matter, who are forming part of these so-called independent advisory groups, and they are writing policy for the police, literally writing policy for the police. You know, I've looked at a lot of police policies around gender identity, for instance, and quite typically, it will be written by the author will be a chief superintendent and somebody else, not a police officer. You look at the first chapter, and it's all about how homophobia is terrible. Well, we all agree with that. It talks about Macpherson. Well, we all agree with that. And then deep, deep, deep into the guidance, it will just go absolutely off-piste and start reinterpreting the law. So instead of the protected characteristic of holding a gender recognition certificate, it will talk about gender identity, and that gender identity is based on a person is who they think they are. No certification involved whatsoever. You just are who you think you are. If you think you're a woman, regardless of anything, you're a woman. If you think you are Tetris gender, whatever that means, you're Tetris gender. And the guidance says the police have to respect this, have to. And that the consequence of not respecting this is an instant disciplinary. So that's how it's got in. We have institutional capture by these so-called independent advisory groups who are invited in by the police, who say, we're the experts, we'll write the guidance for you. They let them do it. That's it. Job done.
It's easy to get the impression from social media that the entire police force of the country has gone completely woke and we're kind of lost. But do you feel there's still a fair portion of officers out there who want to police without fear and favour?
Yeah, of course, the vast majority. That's why, you know, I run two organisations. One is Fair Cop, which set up in 2019, and the other one is the Bad Law Project, which is part of the Reclaim. So, you know, we've got the Reclaim Party, we've got Reclaim the Media, and we've got the Bad Law Project. Yeah, we call ourselves Fair Cop because we believe that cops are fair. The vast majority of cops, I've got family members who are police officers. They go to work without any of this in mind at all. They go to do the kind of policing that you would recognise as policing and I recognise as policing, dealing with theft, burglary, domestics, you know, crashes, assaults, suicides, murders, the whole shebang, riots, blah 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 blah. The vast majority of police officers joined up for that reason, and the vast majority of police officers are engaged in that. However, never underestimate the influence of this small but highly significant minority of officers, some of whom are absolute fanatics, utter believers, but then there's a next group who've been massively influenced by them and go along with it, and that then permeates out to everybody else. So you can now no longer, for instance, if you happen to be a traffic cop and you're on a night out, you know, with your mate in the traffic car, and you make some mention of, I don't know, just don't know about this trans stuff, do you? I'm supposed to go on a course next week about trans, I don't really believe that trans women are literal women. Well, your colleague, according to the current guidance, is duty bound to report you for trans hate to the superiors. And then you're sent on a course and you're told you either go on a course to have your thinking checked or, unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go. That's the influence that these ideologies have on the police. And I know this because I'm currently fighting on behalf of a number of police officers who are in precisely that position.
So they've actually lost their jobs.
Well, they've lost their jobs or are in danger of losing their jobs or are being sent on courses to have their thinking checked. This is a form of conversion therapy. You either get in line with our political ideology or, in their thinking, you're not safe to go out in the public. So we're going to have to either give you a desk job or throw you out the force. That's what happens when this small cabal of very influential ideologues who go hello to the intersectionality courses, who attend as board members of Pride, who are part of the national LGBT police network, which, by the way, is part of the European-wide LGBT police network, which, by the way, takes its orders from Ursula von der Leyen and the EU and has entirely adopted the notion of Rainbow Europe. So we have a political police force. These people are massively influential. And so most police officers learn to keep their mouths shut and just crack on with their job and say nothing.
Harry Miller, thanks for joining us on British Thought Leaders.
It's been a pleasure.